if you go on Instagram or anything like that, you will see social media, like the influencer fitness companies, and they've started drip feeding the word vestibular, and they've done like some very basic vestibular type exercises that when you start seeing it come into the sort of common vernacular, you start going, it's like vision training was 5 years ago, is now going to be vestibular, I think, as well, which is great because it gives people more options, and it gets them looking at the whole sort of organism, I think, the whole brain first approach, because they can say vestibular, they can say vision, or they can say proprioceptive or whatever, but it's now getting to the point where people are starting to realise that all of this stuff all lives in the same place.
Yeah, and it all relates to each other. I know we're both big fans of the Andrew Huberman podcast, and one of the big things...
It's only for his dog, really.
Yeah.
Costello.
One of the big things that got us thinking about another part of vestibular training, and that was when he was talking about research on neural plasticity in adults that actually challenging the vestibular system, challenging your body's ability to balance, is a really good way of setting the brain up into a neuroplastic state. And that actually, if you want to be able to learn anything better when you're an adult, challenging and training the vestibular system is a really good idea. And that's kind of one of the things that sort of pushed us towards having a vestibular training program on one of our online courses, just because it's, as well as the postural implications and the movement implications that we think it has, also it should help make people better at learning things as they get older as well.
Yeah, and speaking of the vestibular, sort of how valuable that is, I know every time you were telling me you were coaching to physiotherapists to tumble, teaching them how to tumble, and they're actually now, which I think is fantastic, and I think in 10 years' time all physios will have to know a base level of neurology. But you were saying they were starting to be taught now about the vestibular system.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was it was really funny at the time as well, because I was trying to shout as much as I could about the brain, but obviously
nobody ever listens.
I don't have a medical background. I don't, especially back then, it's even not so much now, I don't have that much credibility when I try to say science says this about...
We're just two dudes with their magic crystals.
Yeah, we just like finding the magic crystals and throwing them at people to see if they worked, and then sticking with the ones that work the best. But I started trying these. We were running an acrobatics class, and a big thing in acrobatics I've always thought is really great is you have to be able to regress the movement. You have to make it easier in all stages. So if you're going to be able to do a forward somersault well, if you can't roll well, then you're probably not going to be able to somersault well. Your brain has to understand too many things that if it doesn't understand it in the roll, then the somersault's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Adding danger isn't going to help you do better.
Yeah, and maybe not in all cases. Maybe there is that one guy who just, unless it's completely
middle name's
dangerous,
danger, he just loves it. Yeah,
unless it's on fire, he's not interested.
Yeah.
But for the majority of people, actually, their brain needs to understand all of those little components. And then once I started learning about the vestibular system, I kind of thought, all right, well, actually, all of these things are different head movements. I got really fascinated by the idea that the inner ear canals, the canals living inside your ears that deal with balance, you've got 3 on each side, and one looks at your head movement horizontally, one looks at head movement diagonally to the back, and one looks at head movement diagonally to the front. There's none that goes straight backwards or straight forwards, yet in gymnastics, that's all the movement that we do. It only goes straight forwards or straight backwards or twisting horizontally. So I kind of thought, all right, well, actually, shouldn't we test that out? Shouldn't we make sure that both of these inner ear canals are able to work together? Because if they're not, you're going to see people rolling towards one side, putting way more weight on one shoulder than the other, and maybe that's going to lead to problems. So I started trying these vestibular exercises, and these physios were there, and they said, "Oh, this is really interesting. We've just spent the whole day learning about the vestibular system and how it's good for posture adjustment, and how actually a lot of the postural work that we do with people might not be effective if there are vestibular issues or vestibular problems involved." Later that year, I was presenting at an aerial conference around some of this stuff, so some of the biofeedback stuff that we talk about now. And I had another physio who was talking about warm-ups, and she gave a big lecture on, how to warm up your body, and how we need to move away from thinking it's all about if you've just moved each joint individually, then that's enough, and that actually you have to think of the body as a whole. And the first example that she gave and got everyone to try was a vestibular warm-up, and sort of said, hey, actually, rather than moving all your joints, why don't you move the bit that speaks to all the joints and actually helps tell them where they're going and where they are. And if we add in all these head movements, it could be just as good of a warm-up and take half the time. And I thought that was really interesting too.
That's it, yeah. Why spend time, going around every individual joint, warming it up, when actually you can just go to the source and warm up the bit that tells everything else to move?